This past week, I had the privilege to participate in the Parliament of World Religions in Toronto, Canada. It happens every 3 to 6 years in different parts of the world. About 9 years ago, I participated in my first parliament, which was in Melbourne, Australia. It was in Salt Lake City, and now in Toronto, drawing as many as 10,000 people in the course of a week, including many religious leaders and political leaders addressing the most pressing issues of the day. Among the speakers who I heard was Irwin Cutler, who is a distinctive personality in the world of human rights. Professor Cutler was a law professor for 30 years in Canada, lives in Montreal, where he was probably more involved than any other jurist, lawyer, in helping both Natan Sharansky but also Andrei Sakharov in those days in which human rights were at the foreground of the Soviet Union. When there was a vacancy in the Canadian Parliament, he was drafted some 17, 18 years ago to fill that vacancy. And for the next 15 years, would become the key voice in Canada with this new platform of legislative power for human rights. He would also become Canada's Attorney General, an active member, I'm told, of the Conservative congregation in Montreal. He gave a talk honoring 70 years since the United Nations created a shared declaration of human rights and a review on how genocide specifically has been fought against in recent years. And he spoke, for instance, about Syria, when there were only 4,000, sadly, 4,000 who had been killed in Syria. He raised this issue before the Canadian Parliament in terms of Canada's need to respond to human rights, the rights of the people who were being persecuted by its government. And he said people shared objections as to why not to respond and why the UN did not respond, because they felt it would lead to greater sectarianism and greater fighting, and this too would pass. And he went on using that as but one example of the failure of the world to respond in recent decades to horror after horror, and the need to be vigilant early, not to stand by passively, not to stand by the blood of your fellow human being. And when he finished speaking, I had a chance to spend a little time with him, and I said, "You took my breath away in terms of your description of the enormity of needs in the world and how much you were involved in these recent decades. But how do I know? How do I begin to make a difference? I don't have any power in government." And he said, what you need to do, because there are so many different needs, is simply pick one that touches you personally. Know that by picking one focus of something that touches you, that you too can make a difference. Later, among the speakers I heard was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson. Gandhi's grandson had grown up from ages 12 to 14 in his grandfather's home, and he told stories of what he had learned from his grandfather about life. He was 14 when his grandfather was assassinated, and has made his calling the pursuit of human rights. But what he reminded me of is how his grandfather got started on that path. He shared that after finishing law school in India, he traveled to South Africa to get a job as a lawyer in the 30s because he had a lot of student loans to pay off. And he could make more money in South Africa than he could in India. And so in his first week in India, still getting oriented, he had a long train ride, and he bought a first-class passenger ticket so he could rest a bit on the train, which was legal to do. But while he was on the train, the guy who came to take the ticket said, "You have no business being in first class." And he was a bit confused because he knew that as an Indian, he was brown-skinned rather than black-skinned for purposes of who was permitted and forbidden to buy that ticket. And so he went to other Indians because he was thrown out of first class. And he said, "How do you allow this to happen, to be so discriminated against? It's legal to be in first class." And they said, "You got to know that you can't fight the system. You just got to roll with it." But because he was impacted and was new and therefore had fresh eyes, he began what became for him a focus on human rights. And his grandson said, at first he thought, well, maybe he would fight it by some violent reaction in order to get some notice of how wrong it was. But he thought, it won't be effective. What's required in this situation is peaceful resistance, to draw to the attention of the British how wrong it is to discriminate. And there began his calling of peaceful resistance. What one, therefore, needs to do is see hardship as opportunity, to see pain as an opportunity to release pain and provide a path for others. That's partly an introduction to Marla Kaufman, who will share with us why and how those who suffer from the challenges of sobriety is a challenge that too needs to be brought into the light, needs to be spoken of openly, because it is a source of pain for persons both with alcoholism, drug addiction, and other kinds of compulsive behaviors. I will say a little bit more about why we as a congregation are dedicating this Shabbat to Serenity, but first words from Marla Kaufman.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Spitz, for that introduction and your words. I'm Marla Kaufman. Some of you may know me. I see a lot of people from a lot of different parts of my life out there, which is very nice. I want to thank Rabbi Spitz and Congregation B'nai Israel for hosting this Serenity Shabbat, the fourth quarter Serenity Shabbat for our community. I also want to introduce Cindy Anderson. Cindy, will you stand up for a moment? This is Cindy Anderson, Clinical Director at Jewish Federation Family Services, and we partner together on these addiction awareness and recovery events. So I'm not going to tell our long family story. Those of you who were here for the Addiction and Recovery Book Collection presentation already heard it, and some of you actually lived through it with us. All I'm going to say is that my husband and I are longtime Orange County community members and the parents of two sons, one who is 28, almost 29, and the other who is 25, almost 26, both of who were bar mitzvahed right here at CBI. Our eldest, Josh, has been in a valiant battle with substance use disorder for 12 years, since he was 16 years old. It's been a rough road for him and for us, with lots of ups and downs. Today, he's winning the battle, one day at a time, with both feet firmly planted in long-term recovery, and we're so grateful for that. In 2015, about 8 years into our family journey, I read the book Recovery, the 12 Steps in Jewish Spirituality by Rabbi Paul Steinberg, a colleague of Rabbi Spitz, and I think you even wrote an endorsement for that book. And it changed my life, and it inspired me to push for more addiction and recovery awareness and programming in our Orange County Jewish community. I organized a couple of initial programs, and in 2016, Jewish Federation Family Services and many other individuals, clergy, congregations, and organizations joined the effort across the Jewish spectrum. I also realized that lack of awareness and programming on this issue was not unique to our Jewish community. So in April 2016, I launched Jewish Addiction Awareness Network, a national organization dedicated to increasing the understanding of addiction, decreasing stigma, supporting innovative programming, and utilizing Jewish traditions and knowledge to provide guidance, comfort, and wisdom to families and individuals coping with this disease. Today, our Orange County Jewish Substance Abuse Task Force meets regularly and has wide representation from the majority of synagogues. And I'm going to ask two members of the task force to stand and just be acknowledged here today. First is Ron Horn, who represents Congregation B'nai Israel, and Sarah, well, actually three people, Sarah and Luke Wood, who represent Temple Bethel. And we have representation from about 15 synagogues in the county. Thank you. Thank you for serving on the task force. Here are some of our community's accomplishments and programs. We developed and piloted a clergy addiction education workshop on addiction and recovery, and we piloted it here in November of 2016. We got a grant from the Jewish Community Foundation, actually 3 grants now, but the first one was for the clergy workshop. The second one was to give book sets on addiction and recovery for all Orange County synagogue libraries, and one of these collections is in your synagogue library. And then we've also established 2 12-step meetings in Jewish spaces. There were absolutely 0, and I know this personally because I was sat in many church basements at Al-Anon meetings for years and years. There's an Al-Anon meeting that's been meeting at Temple Bethel at 7 p.m. every Tuesday now for 3 years, and at Chabad in Yer Belinda, there's an AA meeting on Sunday mornings, I think at 10 a.m. And one of our task force members is working on getting one in this area as well at another 1 or 2 other synagogues. There's also a group hosted by the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County called Stepping Out of Shabbos that meets monthly. It's a Shabbat afternoon gathering for Jews in recovery and family members and close friends that kind of merges 12-step philosophy with Judaism. And of course, there are these very meaningful and powerful quarterly Serenity Shabbat services that move around the county. And we already have all the congregations committed, 4 new. This is our 2nd year. 2019 will be our 3rd year. We have not repeated yet. I think in 2020 we may have to start repeating congregations. So that's wonderful. And last night I was actually with 50 Chapman University Chabad students. Well, Chabad, they're not Chabad students, but Chabad hosted 50 Chapman University students, and we had a version of Serenity Shabbat, and it was very fulfilling. They asked a lot of great questions. So this has been a real great Shabbat of healing and connection. Our innovative and collaborative approach serves as a model for other Jewish communities. People started getting interested in what we're doing here in Orange County. So Jewish Addiction Awareness Network has presented and consulted in Atlanta, Cleveland, Detroit, Houston, Washington, D.C., and we'll be going to Denver in January. We've come out of the shadows from the dark, lonely days when our son was first diagnosed with substance use disorder. Slow but steady progress has been made in Jewish communities across the country, with more awareness and resources being directed at addressing this epidemic that claimed 72,000 lives in 2017. Addiction is a brutal disease. Finding connection with each other and with Jewish wisdom is a powerful way to help heal the heartache. Jewish Addiction Awareness Network's regularly updated comprehensive resource site, which was just launched around Rosh Hashanah, provides a vital space for connection and support. Cindy and I will be sticking around through lunch and for the conversation after lunch, and we hope you'll come and say hello to us. There's probably a dozen other people are here today, especially for Serenity Shabbat. I think most are staying for lunch and the program afterwards with Ron and Debbie. There's more information at your lunch seat about Jan, about resources in Orange County. I thank you so much for hosting.
Thank you, Marla, for all that you do and from taking a difficult challenge for you and Joe to making a difference for so many. Ribbon Shalom, Master of the universe, may we as a community embrace the divine dimension, the goodness, the potential in each person in our midst. May we know that we all have challenges, just different challenges. And may those challenges be born and changed and uplifted to serving you as a source of goodness. Amen. Our Musaf service with Amy Robinson-Katz and her musical support, which is all of us, we join and rise for Chatzi Kaddish. What